Welcome everyone to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. Today we bring you an extraordinary author and illustrator, Brian Selznick. Yeah. A big thank you to our partners for their support of today's program, the Zell Visiting Writers Series. So I'm very happy to say this is the second time we've been able to partner. Screen Arts and Cultures and the Chelsea River Gallery, an ever-faithful friend, and of course Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. I hope for all of the students and our regular fan base that are out there today who have stuck with us through this whole season that started in September of E Pluribus Unum, that you have been stimulated in some manner by the variety of perspectives offered here, and at the very least, perhaps we are all a little more aware of the variety of ways to perceive and engage the world around us. If you have not yet been stimulated, I promise today is your day. Being the last main stage lecture event of this season, I have some folks I want to thank, without whom this series would not be possible. Our patrons, of course, Penny and Rose Stamps. Yeah. Wonderful and lovely people. The Stamps School of Art and Design and all of its students and faculty, hosts who have helped to host folks that have been up here, nominated folks who have arrived on this stage, and I say to everyone out there, if you have not made a nomination for a speaker, you should do so. You can do it on the website. There's a nominate button on the Stamp Series website, or you can just send me an email. Also, the Michigan Theater, all of its staff who are par excellence, especially all of our organists, the front of house team, and our faithful crew, Jared up in the projection booth, and Rico, our man on sound and lights. Yeah, excellent folk. I also want to thank Carl Green. He is the master behind the designs of the Stamp Series themes and everything, and he does an incredible job, fantastic designer. Andre Grew, our IT guru, and Ian Lyons' crew with Intervision Webcasting, who capture and archive all of these talks, and we place them online so that while we're on hiatus, you can catch up on anything you missed. They're all on YouTube. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you all back here in September. So the series will open again on September 13th. Though the new season is not yet announced, it will be, so look for that in August. First place it gets announced is on the Penny Stamps Lecture Series Facebook page, so you can see it there before anywhere else. For any announcements of goings on about town, we're moving into the incredibly busy season of the year. In the weeks to come, it's a veritable cornucopia of cultural happenings with the end of term. So I advise you to do your research and be aware, and I'm limiting my hot tips today to two things from home base. On Friday, tomorrow evening, 5 p.m. at the Stamps Gallery around the corner on Division, MFA candidate Robert Fitzgerald will be doing a performance of Off Screen. And then on Saturday and Sunday, you can join the Inner Arts Performance Program for an evening of interdisciplinary performance, dance, music, sound, art, video, and animation. That's Saturday at 7 p.m. and Sunday at 2 p.m. at the Walgreen Drama Center on North Campus. Please remember to silence your cell phones. We will be having a Q&A today. Today, our Q&A is going to take place right here in the main theater. We've got microphones at the end of the two aisles here. So when the time comes, if you have a question for Brian, please come down and line up. We are also packing in a book signing today. So this means, depending on how our time goes, we may have a short Q&A. So do not kill the messenger when I tell you it's time to retire to the book signing. Anyway, a little bit of background on our guest today. I first met Brian Selznick in the spring of 2012 and have spent the ensuing time writing to him at least a couple of times a year with invitations to come and speak here. So this event has been 6 years in the making, and I believe that you are going to appreciate my doggedness in delivering this to you because he is such a very fine man. Brian Selznick has been making children's books since 1991. His illustrated novel, The Invention of Hugo Cabret, won the 2008 Caldecott Medal and was the basis for Martin Scorsese's Oscar-winning movie Hugo, Wonderstruck, his 2011 follow-up to The Invention of Hugo Cabaret, was made into a movie by celebrated filmmaker Todd Haynes with a screenplay by Selznick. The Marvels, the third book in the trilogy, loosely connected to Hugo and Wonderstruck by themes of family and discovery, was published in 2016. Selznick has also worked as a puppeteer and a set designer, and working with Christopher Wheeldon at the Joffrey last year, he wrote a new narrative for a reimagined Nutcracker set among immigrants building the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. His newest project is a 200-page illustrated book for beginning readers called Baby Monkey Private Eye, written by his husband, Dr. David Serlin, who's with us in the audience today as well. Yeah. Brian elevates the experience of the book as an object, making the idea of the Kindle seem somehow hollow and foolish. He reminds us of the totality of the experience available to us in a book. It's amazing. And I have to share with you one final tidbit, because Brian is a man who is full of surprises. And one exciting new surprise that I got last night, I just learned Brian comes from a lineage of Hollywood royalty. He is related to none other than, yes, that other Selznick, David O. Selznick of Gone with the Wind, Rebecca, and Third Man fame. So please welcome the inimitable, the one and only Brian Selznick.
He sounds great. Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here today, and I wanted to begin by sharing with you, I like that the red curtains go all the way across now. I wanted to begin by sharing with you the two books that are the most, and have been the most influential on me. The first book, Where the Wild Things Are, Story and Pictures by Maurice Sendak. Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another, his mother called him Wild Thing, and Max said, "I'll eat you up." So he was sent to bed without eating anything. That very night in Max's room, a forest grew and grew and grew until the ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through night and day and in and out of weeks and almost over a year to where the wild things are. And when he came to the place where the wild things are, they roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws, till Max said, "Be still," and tamed them with the magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once. And they were frightened and called him the most wild thing of all, and made him king of wild things. And now, cried Max, let the wild rumpus start. Now stop, Max said, and sent the wild things off to bed without their supper. And Max, the king of all wild things, was lonely and wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. Then all around from far away across the world, he smelled good things to eat. So he gave up being king of where the wild things are. But the wild things cried, "Oh, please don't go. We'll eat you up, we love you so." And Max said, "No." The wild things roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. But Max stepped into his private boat and waved goodbye and sailed back over a year and in and out of weeks and through a day and into the night of his very own room, where he found his supper waiting for him, and it was still hot. Thank you very much. Sudden surprise ending there. So the second book that I wanted to share with you is by one of my favorite authors and illustrators, Remy Charlip, who made all of these books that I had read as a kid. But my favorite was Fortunately. Fortunately, one day Ned got a letter that said, "Please come to a surprise party." But unfortunately, the party was in Florida and he was in New York. Fortunately, a friend loaned him an airplane. Unfortunately, the motor exploded. Fortunately, there was a parachute in the airplane. Unfortunately, there was a hole in the parachute. Fortunately, there was a haystack on the ground. Unfortunately, there was a pitchfork in the haystack. Fortunately, he missed the pitchfork. Unfortunately, he missed the haystack. Fortunately, he landed in water. Unfortunately, there were sharks in the water. Fortunately, he could swim. Unfortunately, there were tigers on the land. Fortunately, he could run. Unfortunately, he ran into a deep, dark cave. Fortunately, he could dig. Unfortunately, he dug himself into a fancy ballroom. Fortunately, there was a surprise party going on, and fortunately, the party was for him because fortunately, it was his birthday. Thank you very much. So this book and the other books by Remy Charlip I read when I was a child, and I didn't really discover where the wild things are till later, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I wanted to just read those to you to set up really where I come from as a human being and as an artist, because I think that everything that I've done in so many ways can be traced back to these two books and the work of these two men. So once I was a baby, I was one of 5 quintuplets? No, this is me. I got a little older, got dressed. This is me when I was around 10 years old, and by the time I was 10, I was already drawing all the time. I used to draw things that I loved. I loved Star Wars. These were drawings that I did right after I saw Star Wars in 1977. All of the most important characters, including Grand Moff Tarkin, the last one. Kids love Grand Moff Tarkin. And I also had a lot of art history books when I was a kid, and I fell very much in love with this angel. And so I found a preparatory sketch that Leonardo da Vinci had done for this. The final painting is called Madonna or Virgin of the Rocks. And so this is the drawing that I did at 10 of that angel. And if you look at the little lines, you can see that I'm already doing the type of cross-hatching that I'm still doing today. My dad collected model ships for some reason. He was an accountant, but for some reason he had a fondness for the sea. There's a poem in there somewhere. And so when I was 13, I did this painting of the ship called the Flying Cloud. I discovered Omni Magazine, which is about science and science fiction. The cover painting here was by H.R. Geiger, whose name you might recognize as well as the art as being the person who designed the alien in Alien and Aliens and Alien Resurrection, etc. And you get the idea. And he was also very influential on me and my work. This is what I was doing in math class when I should have been doing math. So a lot of times my teachers would get very annoyed with me, but I continued to draw, and I found people even then who supported me and were able to encourage me to make work. I started working with an art teacher after school when I was in 3rd grade, and I worked with her all the way up until the time I went to college. I am related to David O. Selznick, that's true. He made films like this, Gone with the Wind and King Kong, and it was so great to see my last name at the beginning and end of all these movies. But he's from the California movie-making side of the Selznicks, and I'm from the New Jersey dry cleaning side of the Selznicks. But we are related. And so I loved watching these films, King Kong especially. And so I went to the Rhode Island School of Design for art. I didn't know what I was going to be when I finished with college. My dad, as I said, was an accountant, and he really wanted to be an archaeologist, although there's not a lot of, I don't know what that has to do with the sea exactly, but he was told by his mother that he had to go into accounting to support his young family. And so he vowed to himself that he would make sure that his kids all were able to do whatever it was they wanted to do. So I always wanted to be an artist. In kindergarten, my sister wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. And when he was in kindergarten, my brother wanted to be a brain surgeon. And he's now a brain surgeon, and she was a kindergarten teacher, and I became an artist. But in school, I didn't know what I was going to do with my artwork. I got to go to Phoebe Glockner's amazing class today for comic books and graphic novels and meet the fantastic students and looking at the work that they're doing now. And I feel like they're all here, most of them are here tonight. You guys all, I feel like, had a big leg up on me because I did not know what I was doing in school. In fact, I was told by a lot of people I should do children's books because that's what most adults associate art with. Like if you're going to do a lot of art, children's books have a lot of art. But as a young person, I found the idea of doing children's books profoundly insulting, and I did not want to have anything to do with children. So I took classes in school that generally did not have anything to do with children's books. This was for a class where we had 1 week to do every assignment, and it was sort of a conceptual class where they would give us a problem and we had to solve it. And this was to do something, we could do anything we wanted about the magician Houdini. And when I was a kid, Houdini was one of my heroes. So I made this glass project that folds back and forth. It's about this big in real life. And this is a side view of the project. And when you take it and you turn it and you look at it from the front, all of those different parts of the picture line up, and it becomes a picture of Houdini on stage performing the Chinese water torture test. And when you open up the panels on the back, is a story that I wrote. Houdini was a magician. The top of the next panel says, a little boy who met Houdini also wanted to be a magician. Little boy's name was Victor. Victor was 10. And I wrote this story about a kid who gets to meet Houdini because that's what I would have wanted when I was a kid. I handed it in to my teacher. I think I got a pretty good grade. I got it back and I put it in my closet, and I forgot about it until I graduated from school, by which point I had decided that I was going to be a set designer because I love the theater. I had acted, set design seemed to make a lot of sense, and then I didn't get into the grad school that I wanted. So I thought maybe I should take a little time, and I'm saying this very lightly now. At the time, it was devastating because it hadn't occurred to me that I might not get in. And apparently when you apply to places, sometimes you don't get in. And so for me, it felt very much like everything had come to a stop. But of course, that turned out to be the beginning of everything. So I got through the sadness by realizing that maybe it's a sign that I should reassess what I'm doing, what I'm interested in. And I realized I love to draw, I love kids, I love, I always liked kids, even though I didn't want to do anything with them, I liked them. And I've always liked telling stories. So at that point, after I had graduated from college, I realized I should be a children's book illustrator. And so I got a job at a children's bookstore after a very smart friend of mine suggested that I get a job at a children's bookstore so that I could be surrounded by children's books. So I got a job at Eeyore's Books for Children. And when the owner found out that I was an artist, he allowed me to do the window displays, which I used to paint right on the glass on the inside backwards. Would do them for different events, different holidays. So this, of course, was our Christmas window. And I used to see little 3-year-old kids come up and just sort of pet the tongue. And I was like, already a good influence on children. But it was really here where I learned all about what the art of children's books means, what the genre of children's books are capable of, what the technology of the book is. People always talk about books versus technology, but books are a technology. They're a limited technology. All they can do is open, and then you turn pages. But within that limitation is the entire world. You can do anything. You can go anywhere. You can play with timing and surprises and excitement and build drama. You can do everything that you can imagine. So I started working on my first book, the Houdini, which became the Houdini box, based on that project that I did in school. But it was at Eeyores, where I was reacquainted with Where the Wild Things Are. I hadn't really read this as a kid, but I knew of it. But this is where I first really dove into the world of Maurice Sendak as well. And I noticed that, and Remy Charlotte as well, I was able to read his books as well. And also I discovered people who I didn't know, like Arthur Yorings and Richard Egelski. And it was this book, Oh Brother, that taught me that a story doesn't have to begin in the normal place, in the usual place in a book. Because usually you open a book, there's a half-title page, there's a title page, there's copyright, and then you get to the first page of the story. But this is what you see when you open the cover of Oh Brother. This is the story of two young boys, who, after overcoming great hardships and adversity, became members of the court of Her Royal Majesty, the Queen of England. And then you turn the page, and you get the title, Oh Brother. You see them having a fight in the fireworks room. And then you turn the page, and you see the dedication, and you see the fireworks. They've dropped their lantern into the fireworks. And then you turn the page, and you see this explosion. And then you get to the first line of the text. It was a sorry accident at sea many years ago that caused Milton and Morris, twins from England, to be left all alone in the world, fending the best they could. I met the author and illustrator eventually, and I said to the illustrator, Richard Egelski, did Arthur Yorings tell you what the accident at sea was? Because all the first line of text says was, it was a sorry accident at sea. And Richard said, no, I made all that up. So that, to me, was such a revelation that the illustrator can really be a part of the storytelling team. It's a storytelling team that is making a book. And so my first book was, as I mentioned, based on this project that I had done in college. And at the time, it was not written for kids. It was just a project that I handed in to my college teacher. But it was about Victor, who's 10. It's about a kid who meets Houdini, which I would have wanted. So I found that story in my closet, rewrote it, added some pictures, mailed it out to editors around the city, around New York. And eventually I met an editor who said, yes, I want to publish this book the way you want to publish it. And I worked for probably a year crafting the book to be what I wanted it to be. I knew I wanted it to be a 48-page picture book, which is sort of an unusual length. Most picture books are 32 pages. But even at the beginning of the work that I was doing, I had a sense that the story that I was telling needed to be allowed the right space. It needed to really tell you how long it needed to be. And so that really began what I consider a kind of apprenticeship, where I made books over the next several years that nobody ever read. They went out of print very, very quickly. It was really depressing, and I had no money, but I had, again, I had people who believed in me, who were able to keep giving me more books, even though nobody was reading them. So I was able to work, which is really the most important thing. And so I started doing books by authors who I love, and I loved all these books, even though it ended up people didn't read them. But in doing them, I learned what picture books are. In fact, my second book, Our House, The Stories of Levittown by Pam Conrad, she's one of my favorite authors. She passed away in the late 90s. You should look up other books she did, like My Daniel, about a woman who brings her grandchildren to the Museum of Natural History to look at a dinosaur skeleton she discovered as a child in Nebraska. But this is about growing up in Levittown from the 40s through the 90s. I was so new that they hired a different artist to do the cover. And so this is a cover by Wendell Miner, and I did spot illustrations inside. 10 years later, I was able to redesign the whole book for the 10th anniversary, which I was very happy about. I did weird books about dolls who looked a little bit like drag queens. I think she was a little ahead of her time. Let's say that. The Boy Who Longed for a Lift by a wonderful author named Norma Farber that I was able to illustrate. The Robot King, which was the second book that I wrote about two children that build a robot that comes to life. And this robot, keep in mind, because I don't know if it looks familiar in this state, but it eventually became the model for the automaton in Hugo. So, thank you. And and then the third book that I wrote was called The Boy of a Thousand Faces, about a kid who loves monster movies like myself. And so these books that I wrote were very short. They were like 48 to 60 pages, I think. They were very, very short books. And I learned what is possible in the pages of a book. But then I was offered a book about a kid who invents a new word. I was able to do the cover and some of the drawings inside. And this was where things began to turn for me, where people really embraced the book Frindle. I know a lot of the kids here have read this book, either when they were younger or maybe they're reading it now. And so it's a real thrill for me to know that I'm a part of this wonderful story that Andrew Clements wrote. And then I started doing these picture book biographies. Amelia and Eleanor Go for a Ride is about the friendship between Amelia Earhart and Eleanor Roosevelt. And I didn't even know they were friends till I was offered this book. And my editor said to me that she thought this book should look like a 1930s movie musical. And that was the best direction I've ever gotten. And so I started watching them. The whole book is set like the Flying Down to Rio and films like that. I decided to make the book black, white, and purple because that to me captured the kind of rich quality of those old black and white movies. I did a trilogy of books about the doll people, about these little dolls that come to life, which was great fun because I loved dolls when I was a kid, and I used to make little furniture. I loved a book called The Borrowers, about little people that lives under a kid's house, and I essentially thought that was a true story, and so I would make furniture for the dolls in my house, for the borrowers in my house. This is a book about the first paleontologist artist to ever imagine what dinosaurs really look like. And then I did a book about the opera singer Marian Anderson, which was really wonderful to work on, learn about her life. And then I did this book about Walt Whitman, Words for America, about his struggle during the Civil War to turn the pain of what he was working on into art and poetry. And this was one of the hardest books I had ever done because Walt Whitman, if you've read Walt Whitman, you may be aware, is not a children's poet. Really nothing that he writes about is anything that is interesting to or appropriate for children. But the idea that, but I love Walt Whitman deeply, and the idea that you take pain and try to turn it into something beautiful, into art, is something that I thought kids could relate to. So that's what this book ultimately is about. And after I finished this book, I realized that I had now done 4 picture book biographies. They were going really well. I was learning a lot making them, but it kind of felt like that's all people wanted me to make. So I stopped working because I didn't know what else to do. And that's when I started a mentorship underneath Maurice Sendak. So this is Maurice with his dog on his property. And I met him at a party. I was too nervous to speak. I asked his assistant if I could write a letter. And so I mailed him a letter. And he called me. And we started a phone friendship. And then eventually he invited me to his house in Connecticut where I would go regularly. And he really changed the entire course of my life. And so he didn't know my work when we met. And he said, send me your work. So I sent him a big box of my work. And he opened it and he called me. And he said, well, you probably want to know what I think of your work. And I said, yeah. And feeling slightly apprehensive. And he said, well, you can draw, which isn't true of most illustrators. But none of these books live up to the potential that I see in you. So one takes that kind of statement very seriously, even if one does not understand really what it means. Because I was working as hard as I could. I was doing the best that I could. And Maurice said, you have to make the books you want to make. It has to be yours. And the texts they need to be brilliant. They need to be yours. And so from that conversation, I remembered a single idea that had sat at the back of my head for several years about a boy who meets a French filmmaker named Georges Méliès. I had seen the film A Trip to the Moon many years ago. And I forgot to say that when I met Maurice Sendak, he had just started reading Walt Whitman for the first time. So one of the things that calmed me down about talking to Maurice Sendak was that I was able to relate to him in our love of Walt Whitman. So that was, because if you're meeting someone who is your idol, it could be very intimidating. It could be very hard to talk, but you have to remember they're just people too who have been on their own journey, their own story, and they want to talk. People want to talk to you, and it's nice to get compliments, but it's also really nice to talk. And so once I realized I could talk to Maurice about things that we both loved, I was able to realize that he was a person who was there for me to talk to. And he also loved old movies. In fact, King Kong was an influence on Where the Wild Things Are. So I felt like my family had been a part of his life for a while as well. And so when I started working on the book that became Hugo, I had seen A Trip to the Moon. This idea, as I mentioned, had sat in the back of my head for a very long time. And by coincidence, I opened up the newspaper one morning, and there was a review of a book. I'll get to her in a second. There was a review of a book called Edison's Eve about the history of automatons, and it said that Georges Méliès, that filmmaker, actually had a collection of automatons that were destroyed at the end of his life and thrown away. And I did not know that he collected automatons. I didn't know anything about that. But as soon as I read that, I saw in my head a kid climbing through the garbage and finding one of these broken machines. And I didn't know what happened, but I knew that that was the beginning of a story. So I began to put this idea together, and one of the things I thought about was, what is it that movies can do that maybe can be paralleled in books? What is it that happens in cinematography and editing, in the way a film tells its story, that I could use when making a book, because my book is about the movies? So this is the beginning of what I think is the greatest sequence in all of film history, where Dorothy Gale, who we've met in Black and White, goes to the door after the tornado and lands in Oz, where she opens it to discover the world, and the movie is now in Technicolor. So this film itself traces the history of film. This movie is a lesson in the history of film at that moment, black and white to color. And so, and that opening of the door is very much like the turning of a page, the opening of a curtain, what happens when you turn the page. And so I went back again and I looked at Where the Wild Things Are more carefully, and I don't know if you all noticed this as I was reading the book to you, but Max's world is very small when we open the book. He's angry, he's enclosed in this little box. Look at all that white space and look at that little box. Now watch what happens when we turn the pages. Until we get to the Wild Rumpus, and the Wild Rumpus itself has taken over the entire book. And so I thought to myself, and then when you get back to him, his world has grown. And so this is Edison's Eve that I mentioned earlier. This is one of the automatons that I did research about, which I'll tell you about in a second. But when I was looking at what was happening with the drawings in Where the Wild Things Are, I thought this is the key to help me figure out how to tell the story of Hugo. So then I also had to do a huge amount of research. This was an automaton that was kept at the Franklin Institute, but by the time I got there, it had broken, and its head came off. It wasn't really working. But I met a mechanical genius while I was researching Hugo, and I introduced him to the people at the Franklin Institute, and they hired him to fix the automaton, so now it's working again. And so it's a really incredible machine. It was built in the 1700s. And those discs are like the memory of the machine, before computers, of course. They turn, the edges are notched like keys, and little hammers go up and down on the edges of those discs, riding along, and it's that movement that makes the hand and the head and the eyes move. That's my friend Andy.
Right.
Yeah. It's an amazing
I see a little flutter to the eyelid.
So he could observe it,
There is no.
see what it's doing,
No, there is a tiny bit of
No,
movement
it's,
there.
and then fix it. So the other thing I did when I was beginning to work on Hugo was get the book Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, which really lays out the entire history of visual storytelling. So if you don't know that book and you're interested in visual storytelling, it's a mandatory read. So that was incredibly helpful. And and I was thinking a lot about back when I was a kid. This is me. Again, back when I was in elementary school, and that was really, in elementary school, was really the first time I went to Paris. And I went to Paris in the cafeteria of Warnsdorfer Elementary School in New Jersey by watching The Red Balloon. And so I had forgotten about The Red Balloon for a long time, and then started rewatching it again. And that idea of Paris as a cinematic location. Paris, there's a real Paris that you can actually go to, but then there's the cinematic dream of Paris. And so I went to the real Paris because, I wanted to, and I wanted to do real research while I was there. I wanted to get information about the real Georges Méliès. I went to the real train station. I took photographs of the train station. I used those photographs to help me make the train station look real. But I'm not making a book about the real Paris. I'm making a book about the dream idea of Paris. This is a still from a movie called Under the Roofs of Paris, which was filmed in Paris in 1931, the year that my book takes place. But it was filmed in a soundstage in Paris in 1931, where they built the city of Paris. So it itself is a vision of the city in which they were in. And so that became this moment as an homage in Hugo. Hugo is filled with cinematic references like this. And then if you go back to the beginning of my book and look at page 1, and then you turn the page, watch what happens. So it grows just like the beginning of Where the Wild Things Are until we meet Hugo. And that's when the drawings hit their full size and we follow him in. I like to hire models. So this is the model who I worked with for the kid who posed for Hugo. I draw from my head, decide what I want the drawings to be like, and then I find real people to pose for me. This is Remy Charlip, who wrote Fortunately and all those other wonderful books, who wrote all of my favorite children's books when I was a kid. And I was able to meet him as an adult, and I was so excited to meet him. I think I cried, and I told him how much I loved his books, how much they meant to me. And he asked me what I was working on, and I said, I'm working on a book about this kid who meets this French filmmaker named Georges Méliès. And I said that, and I realized that he looks exactly like Georges Méliès. And so every drawing that you see of Georges Méliès in The Invention of Hugo Cabret is actually my favorite childhood writer and illustrator, Remy Charlip. So then I had to take everything I learned in Hugo and do something new with it, because I didn't want to repeat myself. So Hugo tells one story with words and pictures, and so I thought to myself, what can I do next? So if you guys are regulars at the Penny Stamp series, a few years ago you may have come to see a puppeteer named Dan Herlin, who works on these really extraordinary puppet extravaganzas. This is from a piece called Hiroshima Maiden, which was actually inspired by a book my husband, Dr. David Serlin, wrote about women who were injured in the bombing of Hiroshima, who came to America for free reconstructive surgery. And the story gets weirder from there. And this is a story that's told half in puppets and half in narration, where a Japanese person tells the story of an American boy in the 1950s. And the stories in puppets and the story in language move back and forth. So I thought, what if for Wonderstruck, because you can be inspired by all different genres, I thought, what if in Wonderstruck, it's two different stories. So one story is told entirely in words, and one story is told entirely in pictures. And what if it was inspired by From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basiley Frankweiler, about kids who run away to a museum, except I set it in the Museum of Natural History, and use all of these things that I really love. And I mentioned all these books of Remy's that I loved, and I had forgotten that one of the books that I really loved was Hand Talk, which was about teaching children the sign language alphabet. So that was my introduction to sign language. So I started doing sketches where I decided to make a story about a deaf girl where I could tell it all in pictures. That way, the way the story is told visually would parallel the way the deaf person, the deaf character, is experiencing her life. And because a deaf person experiences their life mostly visually and tactilely, but in a book you can parallel the visual element. So these are all little dummies that I did for the visual sequences in Wonderstruck, where I work out what I want each of the drawings to be. So when you open up one of these little drawings, one of these little books, it looks like this. So this is how I think. I think small and quickly. And so it's these quick little drawings that allow me to figure out how to make these gigantic books. So I draw them, I Xerox them, I cut them out and glue them together. I got to put in all my favorite places, like the Queens Museum, this panorama, this New York model of New York, which I was able to go walk on, and then use these moments for scenes in Wonderstruck. And then when I'm drawing the finished art that is going to appear in the book, I put them all up on my wall, one at a time. So at this point, I've sketched for a year, and what you're looking at is a year's worth of work up on my wall. So that's a lot of work. And then just to give you a quick idea about my writing process, I start by writing notes in a notebook. I type it quickly into the computer, then I get notes from my editor. If anybody here is currently in school or doing rewrites or having to do rewrites for your teacher or getting notes back, and it annoys you, I just want to say, I understand what you're saying, and I just want you to get an idea about the kind of edits I get back, kind of notes I get back from my editor. It is not fun. And then she finally liked something and I didn't write it. And then when she runs out of room, she turns the paper over and fills the back. And so if Wonderstruck is two stories that weave back and forth 50 years apart, the Marvels, again, my book after Wonderstruck, had to do something, I wanted it to do something new. Something that I hadn't done yet with the words and the pictures. So for this book, all 200 drawings that are done for this, because this is also two stories like Wonderstruck, but instead of weaving back and forth and looking at the way they connect, this book allows all 200 drawings to appear first, and then you read the second half of the book, which is entirely text. So the drawings become a memory while you're reading the second half of the book. And that is very much what the book is about. And so the book is inspired by the Dennis Sievers House, which is a real place in London where it's like you've fallen back in time. It's a museum, but it's not a museum. It's a house, but it's not a house. I'll take you inside. So as you move through the house, the story of the family that lives there changes. And you move with them through time as you move through the house. And so the story is also very much about the history of the theater and love and family. Each of the books are connected by themes, even though they have no overlapping characters or plot lines. They're all ultimately about what it means to make a family and how we make families. And so here again is a little bit about the process where I do the sketches. This is for the opening 200 pages where I tell the story of the Marvel family from 1766 to 1900. And I then Xerox them, cut them all out, lay them out to make sure the order is correct. So we're following 5 generations of a single family without almost any language. And that's what it looks like, all stacked up. And then inside the book, we move like this from drawing to drawing, page to page, where we follow the narrative visually. And this ship, as you may remember, was my dad's ship from when I was a kid. So things like that continuously reappear throughout my work. And I am also a professional puppeteer, it's true. And so I've made some toy theater pieces. And this was a toy theater book trailer that I made for the Marvels. Thanks. Thank you. So filming that little stop motion dragon took about 9 hours for that 11 seconds of, I loved it, the fantastic dragon, but that was a long day. And then figuring out how to make the things like they made in the 19th century in the theater. So this is how the mechanism for that worked, which was made with a wire hanger and cardboard. And it is based on an actual 19th century theater technique, where those waves would go all the way across the stage. So Hugo, Wonderstruck, and the Marvels, as I said, are tied together by both the structure of the book, the use of the words in the pictures, but each of them are finding a different way for the words in the pictures to work together to reflect what the books themselves mean, as well as these ideas about what family is. And so I like thinking about these books as a sort of a poetic trilogy. And so then I've been very lucky to have these amazing adaptations, like the film of Hugo was an incredible thing to be a part of. They built a train station from scratch. But all the columns and everything were obviously based on my drawings, which were based on the real columns in the train station. So now we have a movie of Paris, inspired by Paris and movies of Paris, from a book about the wonders of this film world of Paris. And I got to have a cameo in the movie. This is me talking to Méliès. It was a very nerve-wracking day. We had a lot of computer special effects, but some things were filmed in miniature. So I was told, come see the miniature train that they're building for the train crash. This is the miniature train.
When we get it clear. Are you clear? Yep. Okay, go ahead and call action.
Action!
3, 2, 1.
That took 8 months to build.
Say your next line.
Cut!
Assistant director's son got to say cut. It's my husband. He had a very good time. So it was really incredible to watch how they took the story of this book, which was, again, very specifically meant to be a book. It's about cinema, but the invention of Hugo Cabret was only ever meant to be a book. It was designed to be a book. But what John Logan, the screenwriter, did was, and Martin Scorsese, the director, was they took my book and they reversed the intention. So my book is celebrating cinema, but it's ultimately about the importance of books. And what they did was they made a movie that celebrates books and writing and bookstores, but is ultimately about the importance of film. So this is just to show you how closely they stuck to what it was I had done and used my book as inspiration. Shot for shot, Scorsese went through it and used the book like it was his storyboard. And just, when you get a call saying that Martin Scorsese wants to make a movie out of a book you wrote, it's shocking. Like, there's just no other way to say it. And then the fact that the movie happened, I got to be on the set, I got to experience this. Martin, let's be fair, Martin Scorsese may not be the first person who would come to mind when you think of a director for a children's film. But Martin Scorsese is a scholar of film history. He's one of our greatest directors. He was a sick child who was very lonely as a young boy. So when you go back and you look at it through Martin Scorsese's biography, every character in the book relates to him personally in some fashion. And that's why I think the movie came out so beautifully, is because he felt a very personal connection to it, which I think is really fantastic. And so the fact that Todd Haynes, who directed some of my favorite films of all time, was excited about making Wonderstruck into a movie and wanted me to write the screenplay, that I got to write the screenplay and the adaptation myself. And knowing that Todd, who made Poison and Safe with Julianne Moore and Velvet Goldmine and Far From Heaven, I'm Not There, crazy movie about Bob Dylan, it's a beautiful movie, Carol, about these two women who were in love in the 50s. Knowing that his sensibility would be the lens through which I'd be able to see my story. Because that's the thing, is like, these are my stories, they're like my children, but then I hand them over. So I got to see Hugo through Martin Scorsese's eyes, and now we get to see Wonderstruck through Todd Haynes' eyes. And so Martin Scorsese does this too, but Todd would have people on the set watch the same movies so that we knew the same cinematic language that he wanted to try to capture. So this is Night of the Hunter, which is a really, really brilliant film if you haven't seen it. How Green Was My Valley with Roddy McDowall. He wanted to look at great child performances. To Kill a Mockingbird, of course. And then this is Sandy Powell, the costume designer. I met her on Hugo. We became friends, and it was actually Sandy who brought my screenplay to Todd and thought of having Todd direct it. And she designed the costumes in the 70s and in the 20s for Wonderstruck as well, which was really amazing to watch her work. So this is one of the sets that we actually filmed on a street in Brooklyn. But did you know that there's someone, you can have the job of making period garbage that can go on the street in a film, so the garbage is accurate.
Like so many others, I found it all too easy to stand off at a distance.
And so we cast, the main character, Rose, is deaf in the book, and I felt very strongly that we had to cast a deaf actress. So we put out a casting call, got 500 deaf girls to audition in video, and we found this incredible young actress, Millicent Simmons, who I think is a star in the making. She's starring in a new movie already called A Quiet Place, which you have to look out for. You'll be hearing about it. Except she had really short hair. So we had to put her in a wig every day until Todd had the idea that during the story, the character cuts her own hair. So that when she runs away, she cuts her hair and then runs away. So this is the monitor where we're filming one of the scenes in the 1920s. And we had sign language classes on the set so that the crew could communicate with the deaf actors. Because not only did we have Millie, but because we decided to make the movie half as a silent film. So the book, again, the book was made to be a book. So what is the cinematic equivalent of half words and half pictures? So I thought, what if we tell a movie like a film from the 1970s and like a film from the 1920s? So Rose's story is black and white and silent, and in the silent era, they hired a lot of deaf actors to play hearing people because they didn't need to speak, and they could have visual cues. So we hired 6 deaf actors to play hearing characters in the silent movie part. I had a cameo in this as well. That's me. In the book, sometimes I put people I know in my books. This is my husband, Dr. David Serlin. So I asked Todd Haynes if we could put him in the movie, and he said yes. So David got deep into character. And we were able to put him in the same scene in the movie. And David had the brilliant idea of carrying a bright red record so you can't miss him. And then they built this Cabinet of Wonders from scratch. What was so amazing was that only existed for 3 days. Todd Haynes, if you're familiar with his work, became famous as a student at Brown University, where he made a movie about Karen Carpenter and cast it entirely with Barbie dolls. And so at the end of Wonderstruck, he kind of was able to return to his beginning because the movie ends with a sequence in miniature. And you know how much I love miniature, so it was so exciting to watch them make these miniature sequences for the film. This is a miniature Times Square in the 1920s. Just to give you a sense of how miniature that is. Miniature schoolroom, miniature winter. And so this is a scene from Wonderstruck, but I just want to move forward. You can find it online. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's available out there. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. But I did want to just, for the very end, before we finish up, I just wanted to talk briefly about what's next. So this is the person who I've mentioned several times, Dr. David Serlin. He's a professor at the University of California, San Diego. He writes very serious books for grown-ups about disabilities and disability studies, gender, sexuality, a very wide range of things like this. And so, of course, this prepared him for Baby Monkey Private Eye. And so this is a short video that we made as an introduction to what the book is about.
And action. Oh, well, hello there.
I'm Brian Selznick, author and illustrator of such books as The Invention of Hugo Cabret and Wonderstruck.
And I'm Dr. David Serlin. I'm a professor and the author of several books for grown-ups. We've collaborated for the first time on a 192-page beginning reader.
Baby Monkey Private Eye is about a baby monkey who is a private eye, in case that wasn't clear from the title. There are 5 stories in our book with titles like Baby Monkey in the Case of the Missing Jewels, Baby Monkey in the case of the missing pizza, and Baby Monkey in the case of the missing spaceship. These stories are perfect for reading aloud or for children to learn to read themselves. Phrases and sounds are repeated throughout because in each of these stories, Baby Monkey looks for clues, writes notes, eats a snack, and then deftly finds the lost jewels, quickly returns the stolen pizza, and swiftly retrieves the purloined spaceship. It is easy for Baby Monkey to solve the crimes because he is such a good detective. But there is one thing Baby Monkey finds very difficult. Baby Monkey has a very hard time putting on his pants. David and I are often asked how we came up with the idea for Baby Monkey Private Eye. Let's just say it's based on a true story.
Little glimpse into our lives there. So again, I start with these little tiny sketches, work out what I want the drawings to be. I made a baby monkey so that I could pose him into different positions. I sculpted him out of clay, and then a friend of mine helped me cast him in rubber with a wire armature so I could bend him into different positions. Obviously he had to be in a film noir detective agency, so I did a lot of film noir research, and I built a film noir detective agency about dollhouse scale, so that's about this big. And I used that to help me with all of the drawings of the detective agency itself. And so, here's Baby Monkey looking for clues, and David posed as the opera singer who loses her jewels. He also posed as the pizza chef, the clown, and Baby Monkey. So whenever I needed a picture of Baby Monkey putting on his pants, David was very, very helpful. And and because David is an academic, he always has a lot of academic back matter in his books. So there's a full key to each of the drawings, so you can find out what's in the drawings. For each of the cases, the decorations in the office change, and the books that he's reading change. There's a full index and bibliography. I think this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I believe David made up this entire bibliography. You might not be familiar with Barbara Bathtowell's work or Melissa Eyelash, but he also made biographies for all of them. Melissa Eyelash was the first woman to attend the Winkel Institute for Cheese Science in Zurich, where she famously coined the term chunkology in her laboratory analysis of cottage cheese. She was the author of Predators Who Eat Pizza, the first of many books she researched and wrote with Bartram Capshaw. She was completing a book of dairy-free recipes for snakes when she passed away in 2012. And so this is what I'm doing next. So I have just completed new covers for the entire series to celebrate the 20th anniversary. They'll be released, you'll be able to see what they look like on April 10th, I believe. They're going to have an announcement for what they look like, and then they'll go on sale in June. But I've been deep in Harry Potter world for the last couple of months, and it's been very, very exciting. And so this is the one sketch that they've allowed us to release of one of the covers in progress. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say that, whatever it is that you do, whatever it is that you're making, fight for what you think is right. Don't be afraid of doing something that no one else has done before. Bring in as many influence as you can. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Look for mentors. Go out into the world and be open to what is there. And for God's sake, learn how to put on your pants. So those are my parting words of wisdom. Hooray for Baby Monkey. and hooray for the Penny Stamp Speaker Series, which I'm so proud to be a part of. Hooray for Christina Hamilton, everybody! Hooray for everyone at the Michigan Theater. Thank you all. And to all of you for coming today, thank you. And now I'll answer some questions. Thank you. All right.
We do have time for a few questions. So with folks want to come down to the two microphones here, we probably have about 10 or 15 minutes that we can let that go. So bring some good questions. Oh, we have a question. All right, take it away.
Hi, what's your question?
Hi. First off, thank you for you.
Oh, thank you.
I teach fourth grade, and you're...
Oh, wait, hold on. If you have to go, that's totally great. Thank you so much for coming, but if we could just quiet again so we can all hear the question. And if you are leaving, thank you so much for coming.
Okay. I just briefly wanted to start off with a comment that I teach fourth grade, and the choice of the book that you make for the read aloud, the very first one of the year, kind of sets the tone. Does she know what she's got? Does she have game as a teacher, or is she going to pick something lame? Hugo Cabret is my pick every single year.
Oh, that's great.
And they absolutely adore it, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
My question is, because I kind of see how all these things go together, and when I first read Hugo, it was given to me by a friend, and then in the newspaper, in the Ann Arbor News, there's a thing about the DVDs of George Méliès being released, and all these things go together. It's a very brief question. Why did you pick the name Hugo?
That's such a good question. The question is, why did I pick the name Hugo for Hugo Cabret? And the answer is because I needed a French name, because I mentioned earlier that I saw that boy climbing through the garbage and finding the broken machine and having to fix it, and then I spent 3 years trying to figure out who that boy was. That was the process of writing the book, was figuring out who that boy was. So I needed a French name, and I don't speak French, so I remembered a toy that I had that was called Hugo, the Man of 1,000 Faces, where he was about this big, just from the stomach up, completely bald, and he came with a makeup kit. So you could do monster makeup on him, and then you could do the monster makeup on yourself. And so I thought Hugo sounded like a French name. And one of the few French words that I know as a non-French speaker is the word cabaret. So I thought Hugo Cabret. So I looked it up, and it turns out Cabret is an actual French name. There's an obscure French mathematician from the 16th century with the name Cabret. And so I really thought of that as a placeholder, that maybe eventually I'd find out his real name later. But after working on the book for 3 years, that was his name. And so there still, for me, is a weird sense of joy and disconnect whenever I see a poster or a movie DVD title or a book on a shelf that has the name of my favorite toy when I was a kid. And so that's where he got his name from. Yes?
Okay, as a kid, did you go to the library a lot?
Oh, yes. The question is, when I was a kid, did I have to go to the library a lot? Do you have to go to the library a lot? Mm-hmm. Do you like the library?
Yes.
Yeah. Very good. When I was a kid, I grew up in a little place in New Jersey called East Brunswick, New Jersey, little suburban town. And we had the local East Brunswick Public Library. And so I used to go to the East Brunswick Public Library all the time to do research and sit and read. And then when I was a grown-up and I was starting to work on my first book, The Houdini Box, I finished with college. I moved back in with my parents because parents love that. And then I was commuting to work in New York, but I was working on the Houdini Box, so I did my research for the Houdini Box at the local library in East Brunswick. And now I still go to the library whenever I can. There's great local branches in Brooklyn where I live. The New York Public Library is one of the best in the world, so I go there. So keep going to the library.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
So I read Hugo Cabret when I was almost an adult, and so my question is, where do you see the division between making books for adults and for kids? Because a lot of your books are still, I mean, I still enjoy them, so I'm wondering where you see that division.
Yeah, what is the division for me between making books for adults and making a book for kids? And the answer is there isn't one. I just write. These are the things I just make. And these are the people who I write about. They happen to be 10 or 11 or 12. There are two concessions that I know I'm aware that there are two things I'm not going to write about. You can guess what they are. And I know I'm not going to curse when I'm writing a book. So other than that, there's nothing that I won't write about for kids. And my husband, who's the college professor, has helped me with a lot of the research for my book. So a lot of the information in my books is graduate level information that if you find out about the history of museums or deaf culture or French cinema, a lot of times it's not till grad school that you're learning about it. But I'm making it accessible in a way for people who are 10 or 11 or 12 because I'm finding out about it in a way that's interesting to me. So what is it? So it's really about the connection that I have with it, and then how I put that into the characters. And I had my 10th year was very intense. Like I remember being 10 very, very vividly. And so, and if you look at my books over the years, Victor was 10, in my first book, The Houdini Box, and Joseph in The Marvels is 13. So in the past 20 years, I've aged about 3 years, which, I think is pretty good. Heading in the right direction, anyway. And so the things that I'm writing about for Joseph in The Marvels are different than what I might write about for Victor in The Houdini Box, but I never think about the audience. I think about what the story needs to be. Yeah.
Hi, I make stories myself, and I wondered if you, I wanted to know more about how you stick with a project for so long, because you saw that video of all of the drawings on the wall, and how do you do all of that for a year and stay motivated to do all of that for such a long time?
3 years. So yeah, so the big books take about 3 years to make. And it's not that I'm committing that amount of time to doing it, it's that I'm committing to doing it. And so when I get an idea, like when I start a book, I have no idea where it's going to end up. Like when I started Hugo, I mentioned I had the vision of the kid with the broken machine. I had a trip to the moon. I had the research I was able to do about Georges Méliès, so I had Paris, a train station. Georges Méliès's biography was a big help. But in terms of how all of those things connected, I didn't have any idea. And I knew that when he winds up the automaton, it had to have an emotional resonance it had to have an emotional reason for Hugo to care about what that was. And I didn't know what the automaton wrote or drew for a year and a half. I had to wait to find out what it was. And it was an emotional thing for me too, and it connected with my dad, who died right before I started working on Hugo. Like I tried to keep Hugo's dad alive because I didn't want Hugo to have to deal with losing his dad like I had just done. And so that was keeping me from figuring out what turned out to be the center of the story. So when I realized that Hugo's dad died, it allowed me to figure out what all of the other elements that were needed, what they needed to be to come together. But it took me a year and a half to allow myself to get there. So I work kind of backwards. I work from a plot point or a vision or a little idea, and then I think of characters who connect, or I think of a plot that connects those things, and then I think of characters who would make that plot happen, and then the last thing I think of is the emotions that drive the characters that make the plot happen. So I don't recommend this. This is not a teaching moment. This is just how I happen to work. But the fact that the last thing I figure out is and that's the most important part, is the emotion that drives it through. And sometimes I don't think I'm going to get to it. So I have to keep working until I figure it out. And I stop working when I'm done. So I'm committed to what I'm doing. I'm committed to figuring it out. And so I just keep going. So the main thing is I love what I do. Even though it causes me a lot of pain, it causes my husband a lot of pain. Mostly because I yell at him a lot when I'm feeling frustrated. But he absorbs it pretty well. So it's hard, it's really hard. But it's a matter of loving the thing that I'm inside of and then making sure that I figure out what it needs to be. There's a story that I'm sure is not true where someone asked Michelangelo how you carve. Like, how do you do what you do? How do you carve a piece of marble? And he said, it's easy. Say you want to carve an elephant. You get a big piece of marble, and then you remove everything that's not an elephant. And so, sometimes I feel that's what writing is like for me. I know there's something in there. The problem is I don't know it's an elephant to start. I have to take everything out to find out that it's an elephant. So, and that takes about 3 years. Does that make any sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, good. So keep working. Yeah, thank you. A little sign language. Yeah, hi.
Oh my God, okay. Hi. First I want to say I love your shoes. And yes, and second, I was wondering if you could talk more about the time when you were illustrating for a lot of like different books and you were just kind of talking about how you do a lot of them and like how do you stay motivated for someone else's writing and how do you adapt kind of like your vision to their vision, if that makes sense?
Well, I think again, it's sometimes it is about adapting to their vision and figuring out what it is the story is. But for me, it was about finding where I am in the story. What is my connection to it? So when I was talking about the Whitman book that I did, it was a matter of figuring out how I could tell a story about my love for Whitman that made sense in this context. And when I was doing illustrations for books that I hadn't written, which I hope to do again, just depends on what comes up, those were still stories that I fell in love with, stories that I was interested in. But I also did some magazine work where I was illustrating stories that I can't say I loved, but I found interesting elements in them and then tried to bring something to it. Because, I think I hinted at this earlier, but the main thing is not that it's words and pictures. It's how do you make it seem like neither can exist without the other. So, the two main awards in children's literature separate words and pictures completely. And one of the things that I want us to remember and would love to be part of the conversation is that's actually a false separation. If pictures work, it's because the text is good. And if the text is good, it's because the pictures are working. And of course, it depends on what type of book it is. And there's novels with just one or two pictures where you could pull out the pictures. But you know the sort of work that I'm talking about, where it's really about how words and pictures work together, which are the ones that interest me, obviously. And but I think the main thing is finding yourself in there. Does that make any sense?
Totally.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, in the Harry Potter preview, what type of tool were you drawing with?
Oh, the tool that I was drawing with is a Staedtler Mars mechanical pencil that has a removable lead, and it has a special pointer for that you put the lead in and spin to get a really, really sharp point. And I've got some calluses from drawing, and so I started using the grips that kids use to hold their pencils correctly.
Okay.
And it's super helpful. I use a kneaded eraser so that I can, put it into different shapes. But that type of pencil I really like because you can change the hardness and softness of the lead. So normally when I start drawing, I start with a 2H, which is very hard, and it makes a very light gray line. And then when I do everything in the light gray, I will often then go back and do from there in the harder HB is about as soft, the softer one is about as soft as I like to get, which is like HB is like right in the middle. A school pencil that everybody uses is a 2B, so that's pretty soft. So HB is a little harder than that. And then I do all of the really darks with the HB. But then if there's something like weirdly specific that needs to go black, sometimes I'll go back in with colored pencils, like with a black colored pencil.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to get one of those.
Staedtler Mars. All right.
Thanks.
Hi.
So first off, I'm also from New Jersey, so excellent.
Where in Jersey?
In Wyckoff and Bergen County.
Oh, hi.
That's so exciting. I'm also a senior here at Stamps, and so I'm graduating in almost exactly a month.
Congratulations.
Thanks, it's wild.
That's very exciting.
So I'm also an illustrator, and so I was wondering, what kind of advice do you have for aspiring illustrators who want to find the kind of work that you did illustrating other people's books, or even getting your own work out there and getting it published?
Yeah, when I was first published, it was way before the internet. So I went to the library to get a book about publishing for children, and then I got the names of editors from books and mailed, Xeroxed everything and put them in like high school report binders. Like that's what the Houdini box, it was like in a high school report binder that I then mailed to different people. I would ask a lot of people for names if they knew anybody. So now in a way it's easier to distribute your work, but then it's also harder because there's such an ocean of material available. And so, I think the most important thing is, again, to go back to what Maurice Sendak said to me, which is make the book you want to make. Like, make the thing you want to make. And again, it took me a really long time to figure out what that was. So again, you're ahead of the game with me, because I had no idea that that's what I wanted to be doing. Surround yourself with people who you think are creative and interesting and smart. That's, like I said, one of my main pieces of advice is hang out with people who are smarter than you are, because that's where I've gotten all the help that I have gotten has come from friends who have had the right idea and I've been, but you also have to be open to it. We all know people who are shut down and don't want to take advice, but be open, but you have to be cautious. You don't want to be gullible, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You have to be open. You have to be open to the world. And really just make something that you love, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to take a really long time, and you can't let rejection get you down, and sometimes you're going to have to do work that you don't really love so much, but you know what, that's okay, because look at it as in the long picture.
I'll be with it.
Yeah, because when I started, it was I want to go to grad school for theater. That didn't happen. Then I was like, oh, I could do children's books. Then the dream was I want to get published one day, and then I got published. But then you know what happens? You want people to read your books. And then, because I thought publishing was the end of the road, my first book. But then it gets published, and it's like, oh, I want people to read it. And you know what else would be nice? Making another book. And so you realize that everything you see as a goal is just the beginning of something. And so you have to, and it's not going to be facing the direction that you think it's going to be facing. So you just have to keep being open to it, and good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here first. And this is sort of a two-part question. I was thinking, it's really special to me that you're here, because I am also a gay person who wants to make books for kids and tell stories. And I think coming at it with this identity and knowing that that's something that's hard to get out there in children's media, that's already something to wrestle with. And I saw this great quote from Todd Haynes recently about, many of the movies he makes are queer stories, but even movies like Safe that aren't are still stories told in a queer way with a queer sensibility.
And so is Wonderstruck.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Just how does that manifest in your work? Is that, any thoughts you have on that, really? Because that's something I think about a lot as, the work that I want to make. Yeah,
a long time ago, a friend of mine asked me if I thought my books were gay. And I was like, no, for many years, there was no one in my books who was identifiably gay. And a lot of the kids were sort of they're younger than a moment where they might identify as either way. And my friend kind of laughed in my face. And he was, Brian, everything you do is gay. And he was like, and he meant it in the idea that it's who you are. It's my first book was about a kid who's obsessed with a man who can escape from anything, who can get out of tight places and closets and things like that. And so going back and looking at things through that lens, even when it was unconscious, it became more conscious. So by the time I was doing Wonderstruck, I was aware that the friendship between these two boys had something about it that was special, and maybe one of them grows up to be gay, maybe one of them grows up not to be gay. It's not about the fact or the idea that either one of them is specifically gay or not gay. It's that they're at that moment where anything is possible. And so and we can use the word romance more than just for falling in love with each other. You can have a romance with a friend. You can have like that. Yeah, we all know that kind of feeling when you're with a friend that you just love. That's a romantic, like that kind of romantic friendship. And the two boys in Wonderstruck are having that kind of romantic friendship, whatever happens to them when they grow up. And when Sandy suggested Todd Haynes for the director, I realized, oh, the idea that Todd, who brings that sensibility to everything he does, will be able to see the story through that lens. And again, it's not saying these children are or are not gay. It's just a point of view that I think opens up the possibilities of this story that in the hands of a different director might have been either shut down or maybe another director might not have even been aware of it. And so I think for myself, because my books are very personal and they're always about something that I love in some fashion, that's what my friend was sort of alluding to. And The Marvels is the first book I ever did that with an out gay character, like where there actually is someone and AIDS is part of the story, but it's an adventure, like it's a historic adventure where, like with Deafness and Wonderstruck, it's not what the book is about. You know, we all read books where you feel like there's a disability or an issue, and the book is about how we're supposed to learn that those are okay, or that, you know, it's a way to, you know, educate us, which are great. You know, it's great, but I'm not interested in making those books. I want to make a book with exciting stories that people like, where the characters are of, you know, different types of people. And so I think if you're true to yourself and you're true to the story that you want to tell, you'll find, you know, you do have to be aware of your audience. I was joking a little bit earlier, but you do have, you know, there are certain things, like I said, about not cursing. Like that is something I know, like if I'm going to make a book for 10-year-olds and I put a curse word in it, no one's going to want to make the book, no one's going to want to buy the book, and it would be weird. And I think it would distract from the book. I think it would make the book worse. Because if I wanted language like that, then I would need to be writing about teenagers, I think. And because then it's weird not to curse. And so, you know, I feel like, you know, there is a sensibility around the audience that I'm conscious of, but again, not directly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so but ultimately it comes back to the same question, which we've returned to, which is about being honest to yourself. And it's great because the audience is there now. And there are parents, there are teachers, there are publishers who are making these books, and they're out there. So do make the books you need to make. Because we all need them. Thank you.
Brian.
Hi, yes, can I help you? Christina.
I have an idea.
Yeah, what's up?
Because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we should have them do a quick round robin of all their questions at once.
And let's see what
answer you can wrap them together with, because we really need to go to the book signing in like 5
What's your
minutes.
question?
What do you suggest young writers do who are facing writer's block?
What do you suggest we do about writer's block? What is your question?
Did you have any difficulties, or was it easy when you introduced a unique form of storytelling to the market that has a lot more illustration?
Difficulties around storytelling. This is already working together. Yes?
What's your favorite dessert?
What's my favorite dessert? Weirdly separate? So we're just going to answer that right now, chocolate ice cream. And one of my favorite monster movies is King Kong, which we talked about, and The Phantom of the Opera, the original one, is super scary from the 1920s. Which, thank you very much for your fantastic question. What's your favorite monster movie? Well, think about it. And see King Kong, it's really good. Have you ever seen the original King Kong? Super good. And so, that brings us to these two, which are actually kind of related because I always have writer's block all the time. Always. I don't know if I've made that clear. I always feel like I have writer's block. And when I get an idea, like the vision where I see the boy in the garbage finding a machine, that will sit with me for a long time before I figure out, I might say, okay, like I can make him come home. But why does he want that machine? Why does he think he can fix it? So then I have to answer all these questions that will help me figure out the story. So asking myself questions helps sometimes. Why is he good with clocks? The answer I came up with is because maybe his family is a family of clockmakers. So he already has a connection with clock parts that he sees in The Broken Machines. So it's like, okay, that's good. But that took me a little while to come up with. And then I did come up with, like, what's the history with clockmaking, and how does it work? So I have to keep asking myself, what are his talents? I could draw when I was a kid. I know what it's like to not be able to do something with my fingers that I want to do if I'm building something. And you know that feeling when you can't quite do it? It's frustrating. But I've also grown up and been able to do things that I remember not being able to do as a kid. And I look at my hands, I'm like, oh, my hands can do that now. Like, that's really cool. But I mostly feel bad, and so sometimes I take a nap, and sometimes I go to a museum, and sometimes I try to stop working, because sometimes, eventually, you come up with, you realize there's something missing without knowing it, like what I was saying with the dad earlier. I didn't know what was missing yet. When I started work on Hugo, it was 80 pages long, and it was going to be one drawing a chapter. That was it. But then, after the conversations with Maurice and seeing the movies and thinking about where the wild things are, which we went through earlier, I began to get that idea where maybe I could make a book where there's a wild rumpus every 3 pages. Because the wild rumpus is really satisfying, so maybe we can have one every 3 pages in a novel where the pictures can do what movies can do, where you edit and you zoom in and you pan and you do a close-up and then you go far away and you cut from one thing to the next. And so I was like, I haven't seen that before in a book. It's ideas that are used all the time in visual narrative, but I haven't seen them like this in a book. So then I would get stuck and I'd feel bad. So I'd take a nap. But then I would go back to it and I would work. And then I eventually realized, because I had a 3-page description of the train station. I took it out, replaced it with 40 pages of drawings of the train station. And suddenly my 80-page book was 600 pages long. And I had to call my editor and say, is it okay if I make a 600-page book instead of an 80-page book? And her answer was always yes. So you also want to be around people who can recognize a good idea and encourage you to do it. And she encouraged me to do it. I made it, and she kept saying, what else can you make? What else can you do to make it longer? Not just make it longer, but what can you do to make it better? And so to this day, people ask me, what is the invention of Hugo Cabret? Is it a graphic novel? Is it a comic book? Is it an illustrated novel? And I don't know. And I still don't know. And I still like not knowing. I like that it doesn't necessarily have an answer. And even though it's been frustrating and it was really hard to make the book, I'm proud of the thing that I made because in a really big way, it allowed me to come here to talk to all of you tonight. So I will see you in the lobby. I'll be signing. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.